All right, welcome everybody to the Virtual Residency Workshop 2026. It is Thursday, June 25th, 2026. This is our first session of the day, and I want to welcome our panel and our panelists. So, this is Explaining Complex Technical Topics to Researchers. Our moderator is Catherine Kelly of the Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation, and I'll turn it over to Catherine to introduce the panelists. Take it away, Catherine.
All right, thanks a lot, Henry. And as I mentioned before we started, a lot of our members from our nonprofit organization have a lot to say about this topic. And last week, when we were at Research Computing for Smaller Institutions, this was another hot topic. So I think we're going to have a lot to talk about in these next 75 minutes. As you know, communicating complex technical topics to researchers is one of those challenges that shows up across every discipline and every stage of a project. And it never quite gets easier because the researchers keep changing, the tools and technology keep changing, and the questions keep getting harder. Our panelists bring a range of roles and experiences to exactly that challenge, and they'll share the scenarios, strategies, and hard-won practices they've developed to bridge those gaps. So let's dig in. First of all, panelists, I'd like you to introduce yourselves with your name, your institution, and your role. So let's start with Lonnie.
Hello. So my name's Lonnie Crosby. I'm the group leader of scientific computing at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville National Institute for Computational Sciences. In most of my projects, I take on a facilitator role. So I and my group work with researchers and stakeholders to help them utilize HPC and other types of computing resources and technologies.
All right, thank you, Lonnie. Next on my list is Nick.
Can everyone hear me okay? Just confirming before I start talking. Okay. Hi, my name is Nicholas Staines. I am a computational scientist at Colorado School of Mines, primarily doing a research computing facilitator role through our on-site HPC as well as facilitating through access and more recently, more cloud computing resources.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Nick. Anthony?
Hi, I'm Anthony Lau. I'm a professor in biomedical engineering at the College of New Jersey. So I kind of fit slot in between. So I'm actually on the research side, but I actually develop a lot of my own hardware to do my large model computations, and then also work with the HPC as well when we kind of outgrow what we can build in the lab.
All right, thank you for that. Melissa?
Hi, I'm Melissa Lawrence. I'm with the University of Iowa. I'm the Associate Director for Research Computing here. My role kind of spans the technical and the strategic thinking as well as the facilitation, kind of partnering with our researchers, with our other campus partners in enterprise infrastructure, as well as just, kind of the technical staff. So kind of talking all the languages here.
All right, that's great. Next is Dina.
Hi, I'm Dina Strong from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I'm very, very intersectional in that I'm positioned in the web hosting team primarily, but I also work part-time with the Research Data Service, which is hosted in the library. And so I'm sort of the middle layer of referral and some levels of technical implementation. So the people that I tend to work with the most tend to be the humanists, the biologists, the people who do not have, our Granger engineering level of technical support in their own unit. And so I've gotten very familiar with, you know, a journalism background has helped me with parsing. Okay, explain to me your problem. Let me mirror it back to you to make sure I understand what's going on, and let me decide whether I can help you or whether I can refer you on to somebody else.
All right, and thank you for the foreshadowing of some of the conversation we're going to have. And then Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric Walter. I'm the Director of Research Computing at William and Mary. We're sort of a group that's been growing for, pretty consistently over the last 10 years. And so even though I'm the director now, I often get in trouble because I still like to meet with the researchers and do, my own facilitating myself. And that's been slowly going away, but I've been doing it for a long time, so I still have a lot of things to talk about.
All right. Well, as I said at the beginning, we have experts who have a wide range of areas that we can delve into. So let's start with calibrating language and meeting researchers where they are. So how do you figure out where someone actually is technically before you start explaining something? And how do you adjust your conversation on complex issues based on who you're working with? And so it's basically, how are you, negotiating that conversation? And so I'm actually going to start with Dina first on this one. And I think once we get through a couple of them, we might just open it up, but we'll just do a first round robin for this one.
Cool. So I got to say up front, Henry, I absolutely love your intake interview series because it took me something like 5 to 10 years in journalism intersected with IT to learn the stuff that you are teaching people in this session every year. And, granted, those years helped with a certain level of background, practice, but the concepts are still all there. I will come into any new session with any new person with sort of a rough outline script, asking them to describe what it is they're working on in their own language. I want them to tell me about their research, the system that they're currently using, what the pain points look like. And once I've heard their description, I will start mentally sorting into buckets involved. I have 3 buckets in my head, which are beg, borrow, and steal. So who do I know that I can beg to help this person with this thing who has got, a system or something like that we can borrow? Who else has done something like this that is open source or, so whenever I go into one of these interviews, I don't want to walk out with just one solution. I want to walk out with a solution probably in each of those buckets because so many of the folks who come at me are like, yes, and I want this totally custom thing, which in the actual world is going to cost $300,000. But don't worry, we're going to apply for a grant. We're totally going to get that grant 9 months from now. But we need that thing tomorrow. So what can you do for us in the meantime? That conversation has repeated many, many times. And so it's often a process of explaining the trade-offs as we work together towards this is what is non-negotiable on there, and this is what is going to have to be negotiated if they're going to get something, and so forth.
All right, I saw
It,
some head
yeah,
nods from the panel. So I'm going to
yeah.
go to Anthony, Lonnie, Nick, Melissa, and Eric. So let's start with Anthony.
Yeah, so my experience, I work a lot with the students, right? We are an undergraduate institution, so if the students they're having problems, what they want to solve computationally, typically we do that in the lab. So I typically assume they know nothing from the get-go, and I think that's an issue I've seen recently in the classroom in the past few years, in that the students are coming in even not computer literate. I call it the iPad generation, in terms of students to understand that their files on a computer, that they have to be stored somewhere, and they have to know where it's stored, because I've had students unable to even turn in and like a file that they downloaded modified and can't go on Canvas and pluck that file back off their, My Documents or whatever. So I kind of like scaffold a lot of things from the ground up. But I also interact with other researchers, right, who are asking for computing. And I think I often, how I see where they are is based on their question. I can definitely tell if they're, that, hey, why is this model taking so long to run? And I'm like, well, how many elements does it have? Oh, like 10, 50,000. I was like, how much RAM do you have in your computer? Oh, 8. It's like, well, that's why it's not running, right? And so I think you can infer a lot by how they ask their questions, because if there's any like inconsistencies, like huge gaps of like just almost like pitfalls, right? This is not going to work, and that can help calibrate. All right, here's what I need to explain, and then try to understand what their actual computational problem is, and then whether it's easily solvable like in the lab setting, or I refer them over to like Sean. I see Sean here in this meeting as well, over to the HPC if it needs a much larger infrastructure.
All right, thank you for that. I think I have Lonnie next.
Right. So usually when I speak with researchers, I do sort of like Dina mentioned, have a dialogue with them. So I do like having them describe to me what their problem is and what they see as their challenges and opportunities. Researchers are usually fairly good at scoping projects, but one of the things I found in some cases is some researchers come to the conversation already thinking certain technical solutions are not relevant, don't apply, or not possible. So those are sort of just left off the table. So there are opportunities sometimes based on how they describe their project that they may have overlooked a solution that they either think is not possible or not applicable, that if you as the technical expert can identify and actually explain, how that might help or might meet some of the challenges that they've identified, then that could be also a good, way to develop a project. So you don't have to take all your cues from the researcher, but I do find it helpful to at least have them describe their problem first. Uh, because, you shouldn't have, as a technical kind of liaison, you shouldn't try to presuppose too much about what they do and do not know. So you can answer all the questions they have, be as transparent as possible, but you don't have to go into the weeds necessarily, because they may not have the background or even interest in order to take that sort of information. But identifying those opportunities are the most important thing.
Well said. I have Nick next. Do you have anything
Yeah.
you want to?
Yeah, I kind of want to reiterate some of the things that the other panelists said. So kind of first is just listening, hear what they think the problem is and what they think their final solution should be. Ask what else have they tried. If it happens to be something that you know the answer, I always try to guide them to a solution and just not necessarily give them the solution because as a primarily undergrad institution with graduate researchers, part of my job is not just to, solve problems for them, but to learn how to solve problems themselves. So I always try to, go step by step and say, okay, well, you tried this. Well, have you tried this? Blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, like if I don't know the answer, I'm not going to pretend like I do know the answer. Uh, we are, even though we're technical people, we, interact with lots of different fields and a lot of different, technical problems, and we don't necessarily know everything. So sometimes it turns into a dialogue about figuring out that problem together.
All right.
Yeah.
Melissa? Thanks, Nick.
So uh, I'll go off of something that Lonnie said here real quick and then go back to my original thought. I find that researchers will often bring us solutions for their problems. Like they think this new piece of technology is going to fix everything for their workloads. This is going to be great. But then you, as the technical expert, know that it has these concerns from maybe a security or policy level thing at your institution where it's like that new AI model that you want to run isn't approved for this level of data that you're working with. And how do you not stifle their excitement about getting involved with something new and interesting and wanting to, get your involvement in a project, but also recognizing you're the technical expert that understands the policy side as well as the technical sides for your institution. So having to navigate those conversations has been something new for our, that I've seen. I had like 3 requests come in yesterday to use different AI models with research, and we're having to navigate all those kind of on an individual basis right now. Um, but one thing I like to do when I'm meeting with a new faculty member, whether it's someone I have not met before at an institute at our institution because they're coming into the field because their technology and their needs have shifted, or it's, I get involved with a lot of faculty recruitment appointments. So they'll send me their CV or things like that. It's do a little homework. Look up who you are talking to. Go onto your university's website, see which area and department that they are, and look at the titles of their papers that they're published, look at, see what they're citing and, quick glance at some of their pages, their lab's website might give you the whole narrative of what they're doing. And you already have that one step closer to understanding what they're doing when you walk in the door. So that kind of gives me a gauge of like, okay, this is someone from nursing, not a traditional background that we see in computational computing. What are they doing? Why are they wanting to talk to us?
All right, that's great. And last but not least, Eric.
Right. So I'm glad Melissa brought that up. I mean, that was one of the things I thought that maybe no one had touched on yet. I mean, if I'm meeting somebody for the first time before I mean, the worst thing is if somebody new drops by and just wants to spontaneously have a conversation. That's the worst. But if I have a heads up that I'm going to be meeting with a student or a faculty member or anyone in between, I um, if as long as I have the time, which is usually true, I will do a full look at some of the most recent papers, try to figure out where they are as far as why they're even what about their request, can tell me combined with the research I do, what can that tell me about their skill set, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's usually a second phase, which is this just all straightforward stuff and they don't understand like simple concepts, like they don't know how to run on a batch system or something like that? Or are they actually getting something, more bleeding edge that we'll have to go back and like do some of our own investigation? One of the main things is that I find not to what's effective is be honest and do not overpromise. Let them know about the various problems that may occur, any concerns you have, but then you try to resolve those. And yeah, just knowing their particular skill set, like you'll ask them, like you had said, if somebody's from nursing versus somebody from like a physics department, that's important information to have. And then just like asking them a few questions, are you comfortable with this? And if they say, I don't know what that is, that gives you a lot of indication of where you are, things like that.
Okay, so it's coming to your RCD facilitator with a solution already picked out is a bit like going to the doctor and saying, I need an MRI and a knee replacement, please.
Yeah,
But
that's exactly right.
before you go through the intake first.
Yeah.
So, all right, all great answers. And I think, Nick, you alluded to the next question, so this might be a shorter answer. I'm wondering if we should abandon the order taking and just keep it open. So you can pop in with raising your hand if you have something to say. Does that sound all right? Okay, let's do that. So this is the teaching how to fish sections of this. So it's doing the work with researchers, not for them. So, how do you toe the line on doing the project for the user? How do you know when someone's just genuinely confused versus they just want you to do a task that they should learn to do themselves? What does a successful handoff look like? So, Dina.
So this is one of my favorite stories. It started in 2019 and it is still running today through, I believe they're on their seventh generation of graduate student handoffs at this point. It started out with a conversation with people who wanted to catalog and translate the works of Marcel Proust, like, buckets and buckets of correspondence. And so we did the beg, borrow, and steal analysis. And among the complications here were that they had researchers on 3 continents speaking 7 languages. And so they needed an interface that would present the content and the interface itself in multiple languages. And some people were like, I must have emails, and other people were like, Mo, I can never have emails. So, everything will be terrible. Right? All of these competing situations. I did this for $500 total. Um, and the way that I did it was using off the shelf stuff. It started out with they were also the case where like, well, we're going to apply for this $300,000 grant to get this totally custom thing program. I'm like, yeah, get back to me after that comes back because that's not going to happen. So that didn't happen. And then they were like, okay, so what can we do for free? SharePoint. Um, Nobody likes SharePoint, but SharePoint does all the things that they needed it to do except for the translation interface, and MediaWiki did the translation interface. And at the end of that, they went from having, it was either 18 or 28 different windows that they had to tab between to 2. And it was, it was a transformation that took 6 months working side by side with one of the grad students. But at the end of that, they had something that was precision targeted to their capabilities, their workflow, and their ability to hand off from generation to generation. And that's why it lasted 7 years. I haven't been involved with them other than, every once in a while there's a patch that I need to install for most of those 7 years. But that's a testimonial to how much it is worth working with right there alongside with the person to get a solution that works for them, not a solution that requires you to do something for them every so often.
Oh, you're muted.
Yes. Oh, I need my own sign. Um, so if who has something else to say? I mean, is the sign of a successful handoff when they come back 6 months later to tell you that everything you built together was wrong and they figured out why? Lonnie.
Yeah, I guess I can comment on this topic here. So, keeping the researchers engaged in the process is a good strategy in order to try to alleviate this. There is a risk, sort of like Catherine just kind of mentioned, if you kind of go off and as a technical person and identify, okay, I have the solution to this, you're gonna love it, and you come back 3 months later, right, with this perfect solution, it's probably not going to work, right? If they haven't been invested in that process, they probably haven't told you, even though you may have think they have, about all the requirements or idiosyncrasies that they're dealing with in their project. So, having sort of frequent touch points as well as reviews, right? Actually showing them what you have and giving them the opportunity to give you feedback on that. So for some projects, they may not be able to like take actual tasks, right? Like they do some and you do some. They may actually need you to do a proof of concept, and actually thinking about it as a proof of concept helps because it does, pretty much it does illustrate that this is an initial solution. It's not the final solution. It's something that we can prove out, we can put through the furnace, we can put through its paces, and it's something that is ultimately going to transition to you and your team. So obviously asking questions about what that looks like and how you operate with it sort of after the fact is sort of implicit in that.
So a truly iterative process. All right,
Absolutely.
Melissa.
Um, One lesson that I generally remember this time of year, because this is when we have a lot of new faculty coming in, new grad students, new med students coming in, that we get a lot of requests for changing of permissions for our services. Grant this person access to my queue, grant this person access to my storage. We've had self-service tools for 10 plus years now, and I can explain over and over again to the same people how to continuously use them, and they still don't care. They don't want to learn. They're not interested. They just want someone to do that for them. And so remembering that there's sometimes a balance between which battles you're willing to, put up with, what things are going to be easier for you to potentially just move forward, click that one button and just go on. But also, when do you need to really start pushing back and like, okay, you can do this and you can take us out of the middleman yourself. Another thing we're doing at Iowa is we're starting up some new office hours, and we've been very clear in our communications that these are short 10-minute, like come ask us a quick question kind of sessions to start. We're not going to be able to sit down and like dive deep into why your code isn't running efficiently in these kind of sessions. So trying to set clear expectations with the users about kind of what the, processes are might help with some of the, discussions that you have with your researchers.
Anthony.
Hi. So to build on that, I think a lot of the things that I deal with the students when they're developing their code is essentially, they're under the impression that they just want to get it done fast, right? Quick and easy solution that they get a result quick, versus actual scalability when they actually scale up their problem and it becomes an issue. And so, kind of like, at the end of the day, right, if the student develops code, and I've had this happen, for any analysis for large data sets that kind of works locally and it's for a small batch, but when it scales up, it doesn't work, it ends up becoming more work for me down the line because then we have to rewrite everything, right? So, kind of communicating that to the student, right, or whoever's coming with a problem that it's worth investing in more time initially to make sure that how you implement your code and how the data is moving can actually scale, so then when they do scale the problem it works, versus developing something that just works on a few and then when it scales up it like completely falls apart and then ends up being more work for me down the line.
All right, Eric, did you want to state what you put in the chat? And then I'll go to Dina.
Sure. Yeah, I just first wanted to say that yes, that the idea that calling batch scheduling, batch jobs being something straightforward, I really meant that something I find straightforward to teach someone. That's really what I should have said. But then it seems in our conversation, I don't know if other people have this there, but no one here in research computing actually does any of the running of jobs for people. I mean, people have to learn that. So that's why I'm confused about why uh, you would say the researchers wouldn't need to learn how to do that. At least here they do.
Dina, do you want to answer that or anyone else? Dina, you
Sure.
can start.
So one of the things that we're finding is that we have very small things and very huge things and not enough in the middle. And so one of our local attempts to help address that is called Illinois Computes, where we have a team of folks and their job is to be the technical support for the people who just literally they need one set of data and it's not worth the 3 years it would take them to learn the concepts. They explain the problem. The Illinois Computes folks help them figure out what sort of solution is needed. And so right now, Illinois Computes is very, very well equipped to do things at the cluster scale, but the slot that I'm still looking for us to solve is the number of researchers who come to me saying, literally, I just need a more powerful laptop. I am not talking about 3 terabytes of data trying to open in the spreadsheet. I just, my laptop has 4 gigs of RAM and I need one that maybe has 32. And so we're in the process of trying to find a way to have beefier loaner laptops to save people that 9 to 12 months of re-engineering everything when they just need a little more horsepower and don't have access to it another way.
I've been hearing that for 25 years.
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead, Eric.
I would just say that I would think that I don't know if you agree, but I would think that's a luxury that you have that, and I don't know if other people want to chime in, but I think it's what the setup that we have here is probably the majority that there are still researchers and faculty having to learn how to use the system if they want to do anything. And there are alternative things like Jupyter notebooks and things like that that you can spin up that give people that don't want to learn that stuff but just want some better, bigger access. Um, that sort of thing. But I don't think we're in a world that where we can say, well, this researcher shouldn't have to learn that. I agree that it's project dependent, and we have people that just want to get in and do like I just need a week to churn out this stuff. Yeah, well, we will definitely take that into consideration and maybe just somebody will help them, much more attentively than somebody that's going to be doing this for 6 years. So I think we're sort of in agreement on this, that it's case by case, and yeah, there are instances in which somebody doesn't need to learn everything.
All right, Lonnie, last word, and then we'll move on to the next question.
So in some of my projects, I found it helpful to try to meet the researchers halfway. So for instance, if they are trying to do something and they need like the cluster resources, which usually would require them to write Slurm job scripts and to learn a bunch of stuff they don't know. In some cases, I'll write those for them and try to teach them how to do it. I'll give them an example or provide some scripts. Maybe even I've provided containers before, and I've also provided like Conda environments and things that could be pre-built with some recipes that could at least get them in the door doing what they need to do without a whole lot of ramp up. But obviously, in order for them to take that on and to move forward with it, they would need to sort of do the back learning on that. So I found that as a helpful strategy because in some cases, trying to put myself in the role of the researcher, sometimes, if you go, sometimes it can feel like, if you go to a technical professional, they're going to push the technical solution on you. And sometimes meeting them halfway does help them with that transition.
All right, Lonnie, you teed me up for the next question really well. This is the human and trust dimension. And I think we've discussed some of this already in the previous question. So, I think really this is more about, what is the most challenging aspect of your interactions with users when explaining complex issues? And then just very simply, how do you build trust with the user? And I'm going to start with you, Nick.
Sure. I think the easiest way for me that I've built trust with users is kind of just helping people day to day. You get tickets in, you get emails, you answer the questions, you're polite, you're earnest, you seem like you want to be there to help them. Time moves on, the students get other colleagues, professors get new students, and that camaraderie builds over time, and that trust builds to the point where people reach out to you directly because they trust you. So I think the solution is more long term in a lot of ways to build that trust. In terms of like those first time interactions, that first impression also, obviously matters a lot. And I think the easiest way to build that trust more quickly is to try to find ways to meet face to face or in person, either on Zoom or scheduling meetings in their office. Because sometimes you can devolve into kind of these help requests where you get a ticket in and you're going back and forth in the ticket and things are going nowhere. And sometimes it's easier just to pause and hit the brakes and be like, hey, do you want to set up a call or do you want to meet? And that usually gets that issue resolved more quickly, especially when the topic gets more complex. So, initial thoughts there.
All right. Does anyone have any good stories about someone a user who came in and was particularly challenging, but you've developed a relationship over time? That's toward the positive.
Well, I can say so. Oh, go. Sorry.
Go ahead, Eric, and then Dina.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to find my raise hand button. But anyway,
Yeah, it's like Jeopardy. You're not hitting the button fast enough.
yeah, that's exactly what's going on. I would just say that, yeah, I mean, with what Nick said, there's definitely a buildup of trust after you keep working with various groups, and then they talk to their colleagues and they say, "Oh no, they'll help you," et cetera, et cetera. Um, but one of the things that I try to encourage my staff to do, and I try to do quite regularly, and um, it's more of just like the human management side of things, which is that, whenever you get I have just found that if you get a request or you get a ticket or you get like an email or something like that, um, it's so much better to just respond with something as quickly as you possibly can. Like, hey, I'll be in the office tomorrow. Let's talk about it. And rather than just leaving it hang out there, I've really had a lot of, at least what I view as success with that. People just want, and if they're really in a panic or something like that, maybe I'll call them or something like that. But it's just more of, it's more of a human thing rather than anything technical. Just letting them know you're here and, we'll work it out. Don't worry.
All right, great. And I think I have Dina and then Melissa.
Yeah, I I try to always be careful not to position myself as the technical expert who will hand you a solution. I position myself as more of a librarian, more of a reference librarian in terms of tell me your problem and let's work together on what's the best available option of the array that we've got to help you move forward. I there was this one poor researcher, well, okay, technically she wasn't even the researcher, but it was her job to solve the problem of 25 years of tick data surveys that were changed midstream, asking different questions, measuring different things, stored in something like 500 different spreadsheets that weren't intercompatible with each other. And she came to me on the verge of tears, and we spent multiple hours with a whiteboard and with Visio trying to figure out, where we could even make those dots connect. And I was working through it with her. I still don't understand the tick stuff nearly as well as she does, but I understood enough of database design and relational work to help her make those connections and get to the next step. And I'm still kind of proud of that one.
That's a great example. Thank you for that. Melissa?
So I know it's been said several times over the last couple of days, but finding a common, language that you all understand and, starting with that point is very helpful. And, sometimes finding the right analogy of being able to explain a concept to somebody is just as important. I had a job interview early in my career for an operations position, and they're like, "Your car breaks down on the side of the road. What do you do?" Well, I'm not terribly car savvy. I did, told them the few things I would do, and then I'd call a mechanic. I'm like, but what next? And they didn't quite get to the point. Like I understood the exercise, but they weren't understanding that I had reached the limit of where my understanding was, and I was moving on to the next step. And so that wasn't the best analogy to kind of, have in those conversations. A recent example for that is I've had to redo our RFP for our high performance computing gear and our large scale storage offerings. And our purchasing person did not understand what the difference between these two pieces of hard technology were. We tried to explain that, like, this is a filing cabinet, this is your calculator. Like, we tried all different things. And finally, she's like, I understand food analogies. So, can we talk about this in terms of food? Uh, so for like the storage, and we're talking about like, do you want this component? It's like, no, it doesn't have to be that particular brand. It's like you're building a pizza. I don't care what kind of pepperoni you put on it. It could be generic, it could be a name brand, but it needs a piece of pepperoni. And so she kind of started to understand those conversations because we were using a language that she comprehend, when we wanted to do something that was more technical, because we described it in like, I want the Hormel brand of pepperoni. And she's like, okay, I get this. But it highlights the need for different communication styles. I have people that really want a lot of technical details and they want to understand some of well, why did this break? Why was this not working? And then I have people who just like, is it fixed? Yes, it's fixed. So, you have to put on those different hats of communication styles, communicating often. And, even if there's not an update, I think was said in the chat, it's helpful for the users to know that they're being heard and they're still getting attention from you.
All right, I'm gonna maybe we should do the rest of the session in food analogies. All right, Anthony.
Yeah, I guess I have a story to add. I guess probably from like the researcher side as well. I know a lot of the trust working with like anyone at HPC, because a lot of my data was so large. Like with the micro CT data, you scan a bone, you look at 30, 40, 50 gigabyte data sets, and the models run in the order like a terabyte plus of RAM, right? And so I think, I understood enough to push the limits. Like, hey, I need this, which would often operate out of the bounds of what typically the HPC would allow for. And I think it was really important to like, I remember the initial email I sent them, they emailed back and like clicked the low priority button on the email. It was like, we're not going to entertain this. But it's being able to like have a conversation to explain what we're doing and why it doesn't work in the existing framework that's been set up, and then eventually they allowed it to work. And it was interesting because a few years later, the that person moved on to a different like higher up, and a new person came in, and when it was time to like reconfigure stuff, they were like, "No, we can't do this." And then when it went up there, the guy's like, "Yeah, just it's good. This will work." And so I think that having that conversation to really understand like what the problem is and why we want to operate at the fringe bounds of pushing the limits. Once you get that trust, then they'll allow you to push the limit, knowing that you're not going to like break anything.
It's also helpful to build a built-in champion. So, and before we move on to the next topic, I do want to flip the switch a little bit because communication is a two-way street. So, does anyone have a really good example of how working with a researcher has helped you learn more about the research or changed how you think about the researcher or the research? So, something that the researcher has taught you.
For
Yes, Melissa.
me, when I worked in desktop support years ago, working with the graduate students really opened my perspective of what research really involved. Like they are doing the day in, day out heavy lifting of a lot of these research groups. And when they're not working, things aren't, then their PIs aren't happy and it kind of escalates up the chain. And so thinking about them as a resource to help bridge those gaps. So if I'm talking to a PI and like they're like, this isn't working, I'm like, okay, who's having these problems? Can we get them in here? Can we start talking with them and bringing them into the conversations just as much as the faculty are involved with it? So um, I learned a lot from my grad students and my postdocs.
Eric. Thanks, Melissa.
I just wanted to second what Melissa said, and also just say that we have some really talented, very hands-on faculty, and barely need any help because they already know how to do everything they need to do, and their students generally pick up on that. And so, just in interacting with them when there's something they can't seem to fix. My staff and myself often learn like, hey, there's what tool is that? What are you using there? And we get a lot of not a lot, but we get a fair amount of education from them on, hey, here's how the researchers are actually preferring to do this nowadays. And so then we bring that back and we say, hey, we need to like totally absorb this and get this understood and understand what the ins and outs of it are. And so that keeps us tries to keep us fresh, you know what I mean?
Lonnie.
Yeah. Yeah, similar to what Eric was just saying, you can definitely learn a lot from working with different researchers. So my background is computational chemistry. Of course, I don't just work with computational chemists. I've worked with sociologists and demographers and biologists and physicists and asking the questions about what they're doing and why they do the things they do can actually be a very enlightening experience. A lot of times, they have journals, they've written papers, there's a lot of, background and previous research in their particular fields that you don't know about. And, what their solutions that they're trying to do can be and often are as nuanced as the technical solutions you're trying to tell them about. So there are lots of caveats and opportunities to learn about what they do and why they do what they do. And in some cases, there could be nice synergies between those two things. Um, if to get to understand more about why they do things the way they do, whether it be a historical or previous research context, can help you link to some solutions that might help enable either that, to follow that same pathway or even enable expansion in that area.
Great, thank you. And actually, panelists, I was thinking maybe we could switch the questions and do the broader question about lessons learned at the end and start with the AI and shifting researcher expectations next. Does that work for everyone? All right, let's do it. So how is AI reshaping what researchers are expecting from you as an RCD professional? I mean, are they coming in better prepared? Are they coming in with different kinds of confusion? Are there things that you're using AI for to translate? But where does that fall short? So, Melissa.
So we have a fairly comprehensive Jupyter Hub cluster that we call our interactive data analytics that's being used to teach our Hawk AI courses, which is a introductory and intermediate and advanced level course set to teach people about AI and then, continue to enhance their skills as it pertains to research and development. So we're seeing a lot of increased use of that for AI workloads, and that is, growing that service, but it's also pointing out some of the drawbacks that we are running into because our systems weren't scaled for that. So we're getting, people's home directories are filling up and we're having to teach them about snapshots and how to clean up their work. And like people just kind of expect these things to run the same way that they run them, like when they pull up a chat GPT. It doesn't work the same way on a clustered local environment. So that's an education gap that we're dealing with. And we see a lot of people who are building their own LLMs or, models and things like that, where they're not taking the storage needs into account. And so we're having a lot of conversations about technical limitations for on-prem versus the cloud, and then back to the policy and security related questions about what is and isn't appropriate for the research that they're doing. So it's a blend of, like I said, not stifling the excitement about new and doing something different, but still working in the parameters that we have to with regulations.
All right, let's go with Eric and then Dina.
Sure. Well, I think it's been a double-edged sword in the last 6 months or so. Um, we have some of the comments in here that my worst, I believe it was talking about somebody bringing, hey, ChatGPT wrote me this program and it doesn't seem to work properly. Those are probably the worst things to deal with because, uh, ChatGPT isn't going to write it in any nice way unless you like specifically prompt it to do certain things. But if you just say, hey, write me X and I'm going to give it to my research computing group, that can be very hard to deal with. And usually we will sit and break it down a little bit and tell them, you want to understand how this code is working. You don't just want to blindly be running it. And on the flip side, I find that, and I try to encourage people for this, that simple questions, simple Linux questions, shell questions, I mean, these can all be trivially answered by chatbots nowadays. And so that should be considered a first line of defense. So that is all I wanted to say. There's been pluses and minuses.
All right, thank you for that. Dina?
I'm getting the whirlwind from three different directions at once because there's sort of an upper management push to find more ways to use AI. Just find a way to use AI, whether or not it's useful for what you're doing. Um, the best uses that I have seen have honestly come from the graduate students who understand I've got to know what success looks like. I've got to iterate these prompts probably on my own machine because you blow through the paid ones super fast. So these library grad students installed and trained their own LLM model to search for sensitive data in the Illinois data bank. And they knew what success looked like. And they went through, like a semester-long series of iterations to come up with a series of Jupyter prompts rather than trying to put it in one massive thing. And they were checking, all along the way to improve, they had clear credentials for this is success, this is failure, this is marginal. And they got their success level up to above 80, I think it was 88% or so. The flip side of that is that the staff who are being told use more AI come in not knowing that the Copilot button on their university provided computer is not going to get them into the FERPA approved instance of Copilot that they're supposed to be using for the student sensitive data that they are processing. And so they just see the Copilot button, they push the Copilot button, and then they call it Chat GPT. It, my brain is just about to melt down here in terms of the amount of education necessary that is not being conveyed on so many levels.
All right, Lonnie, you have your hand up, but Eric, Eric, you've already talked, but then after Lonnie, Nick, I want you to um, take what you put in the chat and expound upon it.
Yeah, so a lot of the things that kind of I've been finding, especially with regards to AI and stuff, a lot of those needs are very tool based. So people are going to come with, I want to use this tool or that method to enable something, but um, they need a lot of help with regards to understanding what that is or what's required. So as you can imagine, if the idea is to train something to do something, the next sentence out of my mouth is, what data do you have? Um, and that usually starts a very much a longer conversation. Even how do you do a deep neural network or something like that? But we are finding a lot more requests for front-end user interfaces, right? For Jupyter notebooks, for web interfaces, and just especially in the AI realm, beyond Python, there's just a lot less of an appetite for command lines or actual coding, um, and more focus on the endpoints or the interfaces to utilize the tools or to utilize the methodologies.
Nick?
Yeah, so just to reiterate what I said in the chat, so like yeah, I'll get tickets or talk to students, and they'll like, prompt an AI bot saying, "Hey, I want a code that does this." And then they get the code and then you meet with them and obviously sometimes it doesn't even run or it doesn't do what they intended. So like I don't know. When I meet with some students, sometimes I'll actually, share my screen, show them Gemini, and say, "Oh, well, here are the things that I will input and say, I want the code to do this. I want, these outputs, these inputs. I want the variables defined like this. I want to use these libraries, being very explicit, when you're using the tool because the tool is only as useful as what assumptions it's making when you're asking it questions. So, personally, I haven't seen a lot of institutional training for that kind of usage. It's more just like we've given these tools out. We have, site-wide licenses on the institution. There's some basic trainings about how to use the bots for general use, but for development and for research, I haven't really seen anything like that. So I don't know if that's something we as a community also need to think about more. So,
I think
because I
we've
don't
had
think it's going, yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, no, no. I think we've had conversations in CASC, haven't we, Melissa, about the change and having to fulfill this function as well.
There's a lot of positions out there for AI institutional leaders and kind of this almost the parallel of cyber infrastructure, but for AI use right now out there. So
Yeah. Anthony.
Yeah, so from at least from my area, the AI code, generated code, or even the student generated code is not always efficient in terms of resource allocation, which is fine for smaller problems. And then I think the students have a almost like a I don't know, like a culture of like, well, if it's an HPC, it's big, we just throw it on there and it'll take care of it, right? Just throwing more processing power on it. But I think a lot of the research problems that I deal with in terms of like large data sets like micro CT, like every bit counts. If you're, 10%, 15, 20% inefficient for different parts of the code and it all compounds, you're losing a lot of computational power or increasing your computational time, or to the point where now it won't even run because, I've at least tuned my models to say we're using 1.2 terabytes of RAM. Like if we go more than that, like it's just not going to work, and we got to do something different, right? Use an MPI and try to figure out how to spread it across multiple um, nodes. And so, like I think, getting that, that culture for the students and the researchers to say, hey, just because AI spits it out and it works doesn't necessarily mean it's the most effective way to do it. And you may be wasting a lot of time and resources because you're using inefficient code.
Right. Did that spur any of the other panelists? I'm seeing a comment from Nick and from Melissa. Do you want to follow up on that since we have a little bit of time? No? Okay.
I think where I'm seeing a lot of interesting areas is since we're a biomedical school, we have a lot of combinations of, you know, science and development from a kind of the engineering kind of aspect. So I work with a lot of biomedical engineers who are developing models to solve medical problems. And, part of their research is, I want to solve the problem, but I'm building the model to help solve it. And so we're seeing a lot more development of people um, building their own models um, for those kind of use cases. And it's interesting to see the development side of it from somebody who actually understands how to go about building these models because they've been working with them for years. But I'd met with a faculty member Tuesday who's in our College of Education department, and he's been working on building a model to do PDF analysis of select journal articles, which right now is a manual process where they have grad students read every single of these selected articles, but they're building a model to process and kind of transcribe this data for them so they can speed things up that take 3 years would take maybe a couple weeks. So it's kind of interesting seeing those developments of people who are using the tools correctly and how can I take what they're doing and help learn from it myself and then be able to help others with kind of those next steps. So finding the people who are doing it well at your institution could be just as helpful as trying to help the people who are struggling.
That's great. And so I'm going to be asking the last prepared question. And before that, I want to let the audience know to get your questions prepared. And I know there's one from Jose to Dina, so we're going to hold off on that until we get through the answers to this next question. So please, I'm going to put a pin on that, and let's talk about our lessons learned. So are there some specific recommendations for how to prepare for conversations that involve explaining something genuinely difficult, or is there? I think a better question would be, is there a framework or analogy or a mental model that you keep coming back to? Something that just works reliably across different audiences. That's one question. Then I'm gonna throw another question in as we're in the middle of this conversation. So, Dina.
Yeah, we were laughing earlier about food analogies, but everybody eats, like literally everybody eats. And most people, not everybody, but a high percentage of people have done things in the kitchen. And a high percentage of people understand recipes more than they understand function calls. And so either food or Legos seem to get me a pretty long way in terms of explaining stuff like this.
All right. What are some other lessons learned that you all would like to share? How about if I here? Okay, so here's the question I was thinking about asking, and I just put it out there. So, what do you wish someone had told you earlier about this part of the job? Like, what would be the advice that you are, or even what would be the advice you would give yourself, as you started this position?
I've got two real quick. First, salespeople are not your friend. Uh, Vendors will come in and promise the world and solutions to your user base, and they get all excited, like this is going to fix everything. And then you got to tamper back those expectations. I had a department that was going to do a contract with Box, and they were going to put all their data in Box, but the real problem is data organization. And moving the data to Box wasn't the only way to fix that problem, and was going to cost them a lot more money. Box was not going to organize their data for them. Uh, and then the other thing is your solutions, the services that you provide, might not work for everybody, and that's okay. Your job is to help try to facilitate their research, and whether that's handing them off to somebody else, like it doesn't have to be this territorial kind of thing. I do plenty of consultations for people on campus who want to, buy their own computational node because it doesn't fit within our cluster model. Their needs are different, but they want to still have somebody who understands compute involved in the discussion. So when they're talking to their business or their financial people of like, why does my thing not fit within the central organization's model? Why does my thing have to be unique? And I can help be an ally for them in the same way without having to sell my services every time.
Okay, what advice would you give your first year self, Eric?
One thing that I have, I don't know why in the beginning of this career I hesitated, but I've learned more and more that a lot of these problems have been solved other places. And unless it's something truly cutting edge, which doesn't come around that often, there you can ask various colleagues at other places through different networks and say, hey, do you ever have an experience with X, Y, or Z? And that can be quite helpful because somebody might have been through this a million times already and just could give you like 2 minutes of advice, and it could be very helpful.
All right. And actually, I'm going to interrupt the conversation. Henry, if you could make Nick a co-host.
Sure. Sorry, who?
Nick, he dropped off and he's
Oh,
back now. So, all
okay, great. Yeah, give me a second.
right. Thank you. All right. So, and then I think another thing was, is there something that you found just works reliably across different audiences?
I can't say across all audiences, but GUIs, people are so much less intimidated by GUIs. And that's my background, graphical user interfaces. And the the advantage to that is that there's at least some parameters on it because ChatGPT can spit you out stuff that may or may not be relevant at all. Someone has at least put some thought into what you can and can't do when you point and click around. That kind of ties into the cPanel conversation if you want me to loop on that.
Sure.
Okay, so I absolutely understand why so many researchers think I need more horsepower than I've currently got. I don't need a whole cluster. cPanel, web server, right there, totally free, web interface, can spin up an account, whatever. Looks like Linux if you don't know though that it's multi-site hosted, you don't actually get root. And so there have been so many researchers who launched themselves a website not intending to build a website, intending to do data analysis with the built-in Postgres system, right? I totally understand why they keep doing it, but they keep crashing 8,000 websites when they do it. And we are really struggling with how to find a way to keep our system online, both between our own researchers who are trying to launch LLMs on a system that's meant for web hosting and the external bots who see, oh, there's 8000illinois.edu branded websites there. Let's just go scrape them all simultaneously to the point where we can't tell whether it's a DDoS or not. We like it doesn't matter whether they intended to DDoS, that's the outcome. And so I really, really hope that we can get something like cPanel, possibly even cPanel itself, installed on a system that is tuned specifically for researchers that would spin up an isolated instance that would let them have, if they need root, they can have root because they're the only thing running on that instance, but we haven't got there yet.
Right. Any responses to Dina or my questions? If not, we'll open it up to the audience. So, and if you have any questions for each other, we can do that as well. So, right. So I did see one in the chat, the one that was for you, Dina. This was Jose.
Yeah, that
Jose,
was the one I was just talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
We answered that.
Yeah.
All right, great. All right. Okay, so we're open for questions. Anybody have a question of the panel? And if not, I'll keep asking questions. I actually wanted to ask you all, I mean, how do you handle the power dynamic when the researcher is a senior faculty member, and they are treating you as a staff member? I mean, does that change how you hold the line? Lonnie?
So when I kind of work with researchers, whether they're senior faculty members, vice chancellors of research, it really, to me, it doesn't matter that much because we're talking mainly about the research and implementing it. I'm a very, very, very big proponent of having a collaborative environment or a collaborative mindset. I I prefer to go into these conversations as sort of, I'm a collaborator. I have some expertise that you don't have. You have expertise I don't have. We're working together to a common goal and trying to make sure that the interactions stay in that realm. There doesn't need to be a power dynamic where, one tells the other what to do kind of thing. Now, obviously, if they're vice chancellor research or something like that, there are avenues that could happen, but it's usually not in sort of the collaborative project sense. So I do very much tell the facilitators that I train that I have engaged with researchers to make sure, that they're trying to come at this from a collaborative point of view. And, people are people. There are situations where that may not happen all the time, but I do not nurture that, nor do I want to kind of reward that kind of behavior. It should, these interactions should very much be collaborative.
That's a good balance. I'm not sure if it was Melissa or Melissa, do you want to go next?
Sure. I would agree with Lonnie. That's the the culture that we foster here, that, we're all working towards the same goal. We want to see people succeed, and we need to partner with each other. And honestly, having those relationships with some of my faculty really help foster those discussions with the next level up. So, when I say I need more staff, I can shout that to the rooftops. But if I get 5 or 6 faculty who come in and tell me about these are the projects I'd love to do, and I can kind of start iterating how we could help, those people solve these problems and get them as an ally to help with those discussions, that's been helpful in the past. But, there have been some people in my career that power dynamic is something that you've had to, kind of deal with. And I found that, being polite, standing firm on, what I know is, and not backing down when they're like, well, do I really have to do this thing? Yes, that's how our system works, and that's how we've configured it. If you'd like to do the alternatives, these are your options. And that confidence takes time, especially if you haven't interacted with a lot of faculty in the past. So start with your friendlies, and build up confidence to kind of, start interacting with maybe people at different levels across your institution.
All right, that's great. And Dina?
I'm probably the odd one out in many dimensions here, but because we're everything from undergraduate through postdoctorate, I would say that I have only worked with senior faculty on, I think, 3 projects in the past 15 years. And 97% of the time, who I'm working with are extremely stressed grad students. In August or September, this is their first semester. The previous grad student graduated. Nobody annotated the code. The previous grad student is so long gone and so not interested in answering any questions. And so it's me and this poor, incredibly stressed out grad student getting pressure from the PI saying, well, why can't you just obviously pick up and go on this, this completely undocumented thing that somebody else wrote in their own dialect. And, we're both rowing the boat together, trying to get out ahead of the stormy seas that are coming at us at that point. I don't know how many other people are in that position, but I am. That's one of the reasons that I'm sort of like, okay, you take this or I take this, or we got to row together if we're going to get through this.
Anthony or Eric, go ahead.
I wanted to second what Dina just said. I mean, we've had a few examples of that where it's just the research group themselves sort of painted themselves into a corner and they're like, just help us get out of this. But that is the exception. Most of the powerful faculty I've dealt with here are usually fairly nice, and most of them are coming to you because they realize there's something they need from you, not because they're just randomly asking questions. They have a
And
particular goal they want, and most of the power dynamic is that, we have something they want. And so that tends to smooth things over quite a lot. Um, yeah, so just being polite, realizing that rarely are some of these people told no. And so just trying to deal with that as delicately as possible if you have to. But along with what Melissa said, there's benefits of, successfully, dealing with those issues because when it comes time to um, when the workload goes up, you can say, well, we really need some more staff. And the people, the upper faculty will be very supportive because they have an interest now and getting stuff. And so that's very, very helpful. So as much as you can make those relationships, it's reaped benefits for us very much.
All right, thank you all. And if any of you who are participating have a question, you can either use the chat or you can unmute right now. So I'll be asking for some parting thoughts from the panel. So while you're doing that, I think we provided a lot of you have provided a lot of advice. during this time and and I wanted to know if there was something that you would want others to take away. What would be your one piece of advice that you would like others to know about communicating and explaining these complex technical topics to researchers and working with them on a regular basis. Like,
I I can jump in first if that's okay. Um, I would just say, be a person, be a human. You know, these are you're human interacting with another person who needs help. We're not just trying to transact between, accomplishing goals, which obviously, in some situations, that's the outcome. But having that human connection there first, I think, builds, trust and also helps accomplish whatever goal that you're trying to help them solve. So.
great. Thank you for that. Lonnie,
I put
Melissa,
this in,
Eric,
sorry,
go ahead.
I put this in chat, but I want to get into the recording too. Um, I asked Chat GPT to help me code this thing dilemma. The phrase that I've found seems to sink in with people is don't ask Gen AI anything that you don't already know what the correct answer looks like. There's a whole separate conversation to be had about whether you have chosen the correct Gen AI and whether you are allowed to put that data into it. But if I can start with, if you don't know what the right answer is, that's not a Gen AI shaped problem, and get that through to them, that I think will help with some of the dilemmas.
All right. Any others have some sage words of wisdom?
It can be very intimidating the first time that you are brought in to be the expert representing, research computing or, computational needs. And it's okay, as we've said multiple times, not to know something. It's okay not to be the expert in everything, but you do know more likely than what the person who you're talking to is about the services you provide. And, I often, kind of read the situation and I will bring people from my technical staff into conversations if I feel like ahead of time that conversation is going to go down a path that I'm not as comfortable with. And I don't have to be the face of the facilitation all the time. We're a team working together to solve people's problems. Uh, and, we're here to, be an ally for the faculty just as much to help with solving their problems. And so they'll in turn, like I said, they can be an ally for you to kind of help raise the profile of your group or help you with, questions about funding or sources as well. So it's a give and take. They want to know about where your future of your services might go just as much about where their research is going.
Thank you for that. Lonnie?
Yeah, so I think some advice, kind of echoing what Melissa was saying. I find myself being a cheerleader more often than not with regards to when I mentor facilitators and working with researchers. So definitely building up confidence in your own skills and your own experience and being transparent with the researcher. There's there's a scope of thinking sometimes that people get themselves into. Like if I'm the expert, then I know everything. And if I know everything, then I'm always right. And if I'm always right, you know, when you sit down at a table and you talk about research, that's not the case, right? You're not always right. You don't know everything. So being transparent about that and actually working with them through the solution or through the possibilities actually really helps. Helps with rapport. It helps also build your confidence. The other bit I would say about that is don't be so quick to believe that the other person across the table from you knows everything and is always right, because that's also not true. So it's definitely should be collaborative. You should listen to whom you're working with and kind of hear them and listen and incorporate kind of that into what you're doing. But you shouldn't put too much emphasis, on exactly what they're saying and say that's must be what I do. One of the quickest ways to get a project to fail is to not insert your own expertise or your own concerns into it. If you just take direction from someone else and do exactly that, it most likely won't work. Even if you think it's everything they want, if you do everything that someone else tells you to do without putting your own expertise and your own input into it, it's probably going to fail.
Well said. Anthony?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of build on what Lonnie had said. And from the researcher side, I think encourage you guys to push the faculty to truly understand what all aspects of their problem are, because that's where you can insert that expertise to help build on top of that. I think the people I've always encountered, it's that, like they don't exactly know what they're doing or what they want. They have like the big goal, but the individual steps do matter. When you're trying to develop a computational just flow or infrastructure, especially for my work when it's very high memory, when it gets very large, like every step does matter, that you want to optimize. And so definitely definitely push back on get the details out of the researcher on all pieces.
All right, Eric, any words before we wrap up this session?
Um, I would just say that it's important to try to find out as much as you can, maybe before and after talking to either a student or a faculty member, what their what their level of expertise are, and also what they're comfortable doing and what they expect you to be doing with. Like if somebody expects you to just give them some verbal advice and walk away, or if they really want you, want you helping to code something or helping to help their grad students, develop a workflow. Those are all things to get out as quickly as you can, rather than getting, the what do you call it, mission creep as the problem goes on.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much to the panelists. Greatly appreciate it. Let's give a virtual round of applause for them and I hand the mic back over to Henry.
All
Oh, look at
right,
that.
yes, and round of virtual applause for our panel. Thank you so much. Let me stop recording.